Lord David Shearer.
It gives me great pleasure to support this bill and to commend to the House the work of both the Minister and of the Select Committee in getting this bill through. It was actually started back in Labor's time, and it's been good to see that this has been continued and processed through so that we actually do have a piece of legislation, as many of the speakers have actually said up to now, that we can be rightfully proud of. New Zealanders do care about their environment. They do very much feel a distinct link to our environment. It's something that when you're on the other side of the world and you see a New Zealand environment or a New Zealand landscape, you feel a certain longing for. And I recall just a few years ago an advertising agency which was looking into what stimulates New Zealanders, what sells goods, found that the environment was one of the most important things that they could use to help sell products. And when they asked New Zealanders what they thought about the environment or had to describe it, they talked about recreation in and around it, caring for it, being part of it, looking after it. Those were the main values. They did the same thing in Australia, and the response was totally different. The response in Australia was it was a harsh environment. You needed to tame it, you needed to control it, you dug it up, and you basically dominated it. A very different approach, and it's an approach that I think comes through in this piece of legislation, the Subantarctic Marine Reserves Bill. We've had and we've wanted to, and I think there's a real appetite for in New Zealand to protect our broad areas, our natural areas, and this goes to the hearts of many New Zealanders. It will mean that in addition now to the Auckland Islands, the Antipodes Island group, the Bounty Islands and the Campbell Islands will be protected. We have already had protection on the terrestrial part of the islands, but this now extends to the marine areas around those islands and expands, as was just said, the area up to about 450,000 hectares. And a novel part of this is that the rangers who are going to be looking after this area are actually going to be the Defence Force. And so they are going to be, because they frequent these areas more frequently than others, will be able to do that. The process by which this has gone through has been a very collaborative one, and that's very good. There's been a wide-ranging exploration of various people's feelings about it. There was no real issues in around mining. There was little interest in petroleum that might have been there. And Ngāi Tahu, who the iwi of the South Island, was very comfortable with the progression of this bill as well. So in many ways it ticks a lot of boxes. In return for that, in terms of economic benefit, there is actually a significant tourism benefit to New Zealand from the tourist boats that do go down there. A niche type of industry, but nevertheless one that looks at natural environments and sees them in their most natural and most pristine. But it also, of course, enhances New Zealand's overall reputation, a reputation of looking after our environment, even though in some cases this is not exactly what I would call warranted. And I want to just pick up on 2 points in this regard. One is the absolute shambles around trying to bring New Zealand into the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. We were offered a partnership with the United States, which we refused and then belatedly took up. The shambles that resulted meant that convention flopped, when it could have actually come into pass, and we could have had greater protection over the Ross Sea. In addition to that, I want to also pick up what Ruth Dyson, my colleague, was talking about in terms of the Maui and Hector dolphins, but particularly the Maui dolphin. I mentioned in the second reading of this bill that I was out surfing one day when A couple of surfers around me called out, "Shark, shark," and disappeared off a wave and paddled frantically into shore. I was a bit slower to get off the mark. But what I did manage to see was 2 Maui dolphins, only very, very small, with the beautiful rounded fin, swimming around my board and disappearing out to sea. I mean, there are only 55 of these left in existence. And I saw 2 in one go sitting on the back of a board. And I have to say, it was one of the... I came in feeling absolutely... absolutely enthralled that I'd actually seen these 2 wonderful animals out on a surfboard all alone. We've got an absolute responsibility to protect those dolphins. They are the most endangered in the world. There's only 55 of them. They only live to the age of 23. The females don't breed until the age of 9, and then they only have a calf between every 2 and 4 years. They therefore are incredibly endangered in terms of their ability to fight back, and we have to make absolutely sure that we do. And unfortunately, I don't believe that Nick Smith and perhaps his cabinet colleagues rolled him on this one has done enough in order to be actually protect that. The other issue that I wanted to just to point out, just as we are pushing this piece of special legislation through, this good piece of legislation through that we do have quite a widespread agreement on, is that the 1971 Marine Resources Act that my colleague across the House was just talking about was brought in 1971. It was world-leading in its time, but that was a long time ago, and we now need to look at updating that legislation so that we don't have to go through the same procedure every time we want to make a particular area like the Subantarctic Islands a marine reserve. We want to be able to have an efficient piece of legislation that looks at and facilitates the creation of marine reserves within our territorial waters and beyond into our economic zone in addition to that. I'd like to see many more marine reserves brought into and enacted and brought into place. They do have a real role in the ability to regenerate fisheries. Anybody that has gone up to Goat Island or any of the other marine reserves or the Poor Knights and have seen the proliferation of fish and marine life in those areas know that these areas are not only valuable in terms of the information, the education, the wonder that they can provide us when we're in those areas, but also in terms of helping those areas regenerate and the fish stocks regenerate as well. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to continue to go on any further on this. I wanted to just say once again that the Labor Party has been behind this bill, supported the government on it. It was something that we felt strong about during our time in office. This government is taking it on further. The work of the Select Committee has been very good. I commend once again the Minister for pushing this through, and it's a very, I think, a good point for this Parliament to be agreeing to the protection of a particularly important part of our natural ecosystem around New Zealand through the Subantarctic Marine Reserves Bill. And so with that, sir, I commend this bill to the House.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker.